Hello, my name is Joe Foy, and I'm Protected Areas Campaigner for the Wilderness Committee. We've just published this brand new little education report, Spotted Owl Forest Revival. I wanted to do a few little videos about this particular publication because it goes through a number of issues and items and upcoming news events that all pertain to the forests around Metro Vancouver, essentially southwestern BC, where something in the order of 3 million people live and like to recreate in the local forests. And therefore, I think this is really big news, what's contained in this little publication. That's why I'm producing these videos. I think there's some things we got to nail down. The totality, the reality of the situation we face here in southwestern BC when it comes to spotted owl. It's this. There's only one wild-born spotted owl left out in the forest. So when I'm talking about this is the range of the spotted owls and spotted owls live here and spotted owls live there, I'm really talking about the habitat because we're down to one last owl, and that one last owl hasn't been seen in a couple of years and may no longer be alive. That means that for the first time in many thousands of years, we may not have any spotted owls out in the wild forest. And that's really, really sad. We do have spotted owls, a little over 30 spotted owls in the captive breeding program that the province runs. So when I talk about protecting spotted owl habitat, I'm talking about the place where we can release those captive-born owls so that they can get a foothold and survive. Now, it's been tried. There's been several captive-born owls released, and none have survived over the winter. So we are in a dire situation. So when I talk about a captive breeding program and releasing the owls, be aware that though the biologists here have figured out how to raise baby spotted owls, no mean feat. It's never been done before. So their facility, which is located in Fort Langley, has made tremendous progress since it started back in 2007. Nevertheless, we are in a very, very bad place. But it's worth doing everything we can do to bring this species back because there are so many other species that are sliding towards disappearing in this part of the world because, frankly, we've logged too much old-growth forest. So when I talk about the federally mapped spotted owl habitat, what I'm talking about is some surviving old-growth forest and some older second growth forests that's around these surviving areas of old growth that we can look into the future and sort of stitch together back enough habitat to start bringing back the spotted owl and start preventing the other species from continuing to decline in the same direction of the spotted owl. The other issue I think we all need to grok on is when I talk about spotted owl habitat in this context, I'm talking about lands that are all of it, unceded, ungiven away First Nations territory. That's very, very important because when we talk about governments like the government of BC handing out logging permits for spotted owl critical habitat that the federal government has designated, we have to remember that there are other governments, ancient governments here, pre-existing governments, the First Nations governments, whose territory this is and who some of them play a very leading role, a preeminent role in fighting to bring back the spotted owl from the brink of extinction. And one of those is the Spuzum Nation, located in the Fraser Canyon, and we'll hear more about the Spuzum Nation. But it's very, very important to remember that a central part of this story is that the indigenous nations, the First Nations here, the people here, have lived with and around spotted owls for thousands of years. And every nation has their own stories about owls. And so it's a key part of the social fabric of this region, the historical truth of this region, and the future of this region that we want to work together to bring back the health of the forest and to hold on to the spotted owl and all the other beautiful wild creatures that live in the old growth forests and now that are in trouble. This series of videos, this is the first one, gives you a little taste of where we're going, is going to examine these various components. But throughout it all, please remember, we may not have any wild spotted owls on the landscape. We have a captive breeding program, which can only work if we can release spotted owls into functioning habitat with a future. And that's what especially the federal government has done in cooperation with the province and the First Nations governments. There's actually a document that's been signed, an agreement that's been signed, the Tripartite Nature Agreement, that brings the three governments together. That is the First Nations governments, the federal government, and the provincial government. The First Nations government is the First Nations Leadership Council that advocate for First Nations title and rights. That's a tremendous development for the conservation of old growth forest and preservation of spotted owls because it recognizes the reality. This is all unceded First Nations territory. And I think I've set some of the sort of ground rules, the bedrock that we're sitting on, that you'll better understand when I talk about spotted owl range running from Lillooet to the US border, from Manning Park to Howe Sound. And when I talk about spotted owls living here and spotted owls living there, we've reached the point now there are likely no more than one wild-boar spotted owl on the landscape, and there may not be any. And we're fighting back from that point. It's about the federal government's strategy to bring back this little creature, the spotted owl, which is on the edge of completely disappearing from Canada, which would be a shame. I think the official term for it is extirpated, because even if we were to lose the spotted owl from Canada, it still exists in the United States, all the way down the coast into Northern California. But spotted owl's in trouble in the US too. But here in Canada, it only exists sort of in an area from Lillooet to the US border and from Manning Park over to Howe Sound. So I wanted to go through step by step the issues facing the spotted owl, but also a really, really big announcement that's coming up. I'm doing this video right now towards the end of February. Somewhere in March, we're expecting to see the federal government will finally release their spotted owl recovery strategy. Now, I should say that it's 20 years overdue. That's right, 20 years overdue. The federal government has a species at-risk law, which requires them to issue a recovery strategy once a species has been declared endangered. And that's what's happened with the spotted owl. It has been declared endangered, but the federal government has constantly dragged its feet. That's because the spotted owl, the reasons for its endangerment is the forest industry in British Columbia. And as we probably all know, the forest industry is a very important industry in the province of British Columbia and in Canada in general, and it has a lot of political weight behind it. And that, in my opinion, has resulted in the continuing loss of spotted owls in Canada because of delayed action to protect habitat, continued logging of spotted owl habitat, and this delayed action to finally bring in a recovery plan. But it looks like, given all the delays and all the disappointments we've faced, it looks like the federal government's getting ready to actually release and finalize, it's probably the proper term, finalize the federal government's spotted owl recovery plan. And it's a really big deal because it recommends, it calls for the protection of 2,000 square kilometers of forests in southwestern BC, all around the Metro Vancouver area, far north is Lillooet, calls for their protection These are forests that are outside of provincial parks or any other form of protection. So that has huge implications, not only for the ability for us to bring spotted owls back from the edge of extinction in Canada, but also for protecting places that we all like to go hike or fish, protecting watersheds, preventing future landslides and forest fires. I want to go through all those things too. In addition, the federal government has released their draft plan so we can see these 2,000 square kilometers that the federal government is proposing be protected. So I want to go over the maps, valley by valley, area by area, so you can see if areas important to you, places you like to go, I don't know, fishing in the Skagit Valley or hiking in the Chilliwack Valley or heading up into the Chehalis Valley, Nahatlatch Valley, all around Whistler, all the areas that people like to go and are tired of seeing them logged, coming back for another visit, finding a new clear cut in a favored forest. This federal spotted owl recovery plan has the great potential to protect your favorite forested areas now and far, far into the future. So that's great news. I want to go through those areas. The other things I want to talk about in a series of these videos is how the province and federal governments have been working to restore the spotted owl population and what mistakes they've made. For instance, the provincial government has continued to hand out logging permits for spotted owl critical habitat the federal government has mapped. Okay, I've gone onto the Wilderness Committee website, our spotted owl site, just to give you an idea of the map, the digital map that our newspaper report is attached to. It really is quite amazing. It gives you the opportunity to fly around Spotted Owl Range in Canada, which is just the extreme southwestern corner of the province. You can see it here marked in purple. It's really just a small part of the province. We can see that Vancouver is sort of in the southwestern corner. Whistler is up towards the middle, and Lillooet is up towards the northern part of the range. So all within a day trip of Metro Vancouver, which means that the forests protected here are really important for recreation, for water conservation, for indigenous communities, all within the southwestern corner of BC. So let's fly in a little bit and see what this map can help us with. First of all, these dark green areas, this is the 2,000 square kilometers of federally mapped habitat that we have been talking about. Here we go. So let's find an area that we sort of recognize here. Here is, well, let's go out to the Chilliwack Lake. There we go. There's Chilliwack Lake right there. Chilliwack Lake, of course, is in a provincial park. And we can see the light color that delineates where the provincial park is. We can also see these other areas that are surrounded by boundaries. This area here, for instance, Williams Peak Ridge. Here's Foley Creek on the other side, for those of you that know this area. The ridge is mostly the spotted owl critical habitat as mapped by the federal government. You can see that by the dark green, but the boundary delineates a wildlife habitat area. This one is a no logging zone set aside by the provincial government. You can see the spotted owl habitat in dark green within the provincial park, but also outside the provincial park, we can see significant areas of spotted owl habitat over towards the Skagit and the Silverhope Creek valleys. You can start to see the wildlife habitat areas set aside by the provincial government. So really interesting to zoom in and see where the federal government is proposing protection. Now we're going to do a full video on this a little bit later. This is just a little taste of what we can see right now. Here's the Nahatlatch Valley. We can see a fair bit is in wildlife habitat areas. These are protected from logging, but we can also see quite a bit of spotted owl critical habitat is left outside of any protection currently. Here's the Teapot Valley with its fabulous amount of old growth spotted owl critical habitat, totally unprotected. Once the federal government's recovery strategy is finalized, hopefully in March, then we've got a shot at getting all this dark green area. That's 2,000 square kilometers, all of it protected. It's going to take a bit of a fight to get that, but we need that, not just for spotted owls, but for all sorts of things. Outdoor recreation, protection of other species, protection of water, mitigation of forest fire hazard, and mitigation of landslide and river erosion hazard. All of this can be made better, not fixed, but made better than it is by making sure that these spotted owl forests are fully protected. Over here on the side of the map, we have other layers that you can make show up on the map. So here's existing parks and protected areas. There's a little eyeball there. If I click on it, the parks disappear. If I click again, they come back. See how they kind of fade away and come back. So that's what I mean by layers. You can make these layers go off and on so that you sort of understand. So what have we got here? Proposed cut blocks. Let's have a look at this. These are cut blocks that logging companies have suggested, but they're not yet approved. They're not even being considered by the district managers. We have other cut block layers. Here we go, forest tenure cut blocks. So let's have a look at this. Oh yeah, the yellow are areas that have already been logged. And you can see this extensive logging. Where is this? This is the Upper Pitt River, an area I know fairly well, and you can see there's been a lot of logging up in here. The red is approved cut blocks. So if we kind of move around a little bit, here's the Chehalis Valley. Yes, we can see one, there's a lot of spotted owl habitat. Two, there are a fair bit of approved cut blocks is showing up. Look at this, this approved cut block is not overlapping with federally mapped spotted owl habitat, so that is a good thing. This cut block, however, you can see it's taking that piece of the federally mapped habitat out. That is not a good thing. So as we move around, we get a very good sense of where spotted owl habitat is most at threat. And we can see some of the areas that have recently been logged. See these kind of carve out holes out of the spotted owl critical habitat as mapped by the federal government. So the whole idea of designating these areas is try to create forested corridors so that when young spotted owls leave the nest, they have a chance of reaching other habitat. Think of these green corridors like big rivers for spotted owls and other old growth dependent wildlife that move around. You don't want to totally islandize them. In other words, just leave them in a little isolated block of forest. You want to be able to protect the old forests that we have left, but also to regrow forests that help create this corridor, which you can really see here in the Fraser Canyon. Here's the Stein Valley, beautiful protected area, and down here in the lower elevations you see a corridor of spotted owl federally mapped habitat. I should say spotted owls are not on the mountaintops, they're in the mid and low elevations, which is why you get these it looks like corridors, but what you're seeing is the valley bottoms and up the mountain sides. Now sometimes what happens is what you're seeing is, see this, like this, what you're seeing is the bottoms of the valleys have been so heavily logged that the federal government has tended to map the valley sides because that's where the best opportunity to protect corridor of spotted owl habitat exists. Here in the Fraser Canyon, though, there's a much wider area of low elevation forest, so you get this sense of quite large areas being mapped out for protection. So we're going to have a closer look at this in future videos, but you can go to our website right now, wildernesscommittee.org, and see this map and use it to check out some of your favorite sites or to answer some of your questions about areas that are being proposed for logging, areas that have been logged in spotted owl habitat. We're going to end the video here pretty soon. I put in the links, some of the things that we've talked about. So I've got a link to the newspaper that talks about the federal government's recovery strategy that's likely to be finalized in March, thereabouts. I put in a link to the Spotted Owl campaign page where you can look at some of the maps that we've gone through and some of the information. And The next video that I'll publish will actually hone in on some of the specific issues that we talked about as we get to know about this place in southwestern BC where over half the people of the province live, but where there's these mysterious valleys and forests where if you go into them, you could have an entire valley of old-growth forest to yourself. A stone's throw away from where 3 million people live. It's a fabulous part of the world to live in, a mysterious part of the world, but it's a part of the world whose ecology is in trouble, mostly because of the terrible impacts of a century of industrial logging. But now that we can see those impacts, we can begin to start healing and restoring the forest so it no longer sheds species, but it once again becomes a refuge for species like the spotted owl. Thanks for watching. Until next time, this is Joe Foy, Protected Areas Campaigner for the Wilderness Committee.